From Cortland, New York, America's smallest small city, it's the NERDBomber Podcast, featuring the best news, entertainment, and related discussion that pop culture has to offer. And now, your hosts and experts in anti-social media, Just Jamie and your friend Claude. Ladies, gentlemen, millennials, welcome to the NERDBomber Podcast. I am your friend Claude, here for the first time in a long time with
Just Jamie.
And today we are going to be discussing something that is kind of a bit of a refuge in the chaos of the greater world. And that is our favorite public broadcasting service shows. And I think that PBS has always provided that kind of feeling and an insulation, I suppose, from, having to deal with harsh realities for a while and kind of protected you in a way, I suppose.
I feel like it still does. It's still the home of some things that I like to watch when I just want to feel nice and a little smarter, maybe sometimes. Not smarter, just nicer, kinder, quieter, gentler.
Yeah, it's like the original form of infotainment, but without the heavy-handed corporate sponsorship. When it became pledge drive time, that got a little heavy-handed, but that was like once a year or maybe twice a year.
Yeah, that's, I have spent some years listening to, NPR and public radio as an adult, and it's much worse on the radio. So
right.
By comparison, the TV drives are not so bad.
Right. And I don't mind
but
that.
I understand their purpose.
Yeah. If it makes the rest of the year commercial free, then hey, I'm all for it.
Yep.
Well, I have picked 3 shows proper for our little breakdown here, but I want to kick off by mentioning 2 things that 2 shows that I didn't want to devote full descriptive places on the list to. First one of those honorable mentions is Zoobilee Zoo.
Everyone up, everyone in. Time for the fun to begin. Come along with us to Zoobilee Zoo. Zoobilee Zoo. Magic and wonder are waiting for you.
It is a 1-season show debuting in 1986. And the best way I can describe it is it's as if someone saw Cats and said, let's do that for kids, but with even more kinds of animals.
That's a really apt description. I had that on my list, not as one of my choices proper, it was just kind of holding a place just in case. So I'm glad you're mentioning it here.
Yeah, I guess that it's kind of in an equal spot on my own.
Interestingly, it was syndicated. And local PBS stations picked it up, so not everybody necessarily had access to Zoobilee Zoo growing up.
Right. Yeah, it's a 1-season show, but it ran in syndication until 2000.
Which is insane that they could get that much
mileage
out of it.
It's at another 15 years or whatever. 13 years out of probably 13 episodes.
Yeah.
And despite it seeming to take inspiration from Cats, there are only 2 cats on the cast. One of them being a cheetah, who was the mayor, played by Ben Vereen, and this was the first thing I ever saw him in. Would see him.
He
later.
seems to have been the major creative force behind the show, actually.
Seems like, yeah.
All the information that I saw, it was hard to find who created the show, but everything said presented by Ben Vereen.
Yeah, I guess that kind of plays out on screen. He sort of is in a central, obviously he's the mayor, but he's also kind of the focal point whenever he's on the show in a lot of ways.
Right.
And then there was a lion named Van Gogh Lion.
Yes, of course.
He was my favorite just because he was an artist when I was a kid, and lions are always the coolest.
Ditto, and he's like the one character I sort of remembered into my adulthood.
Yeah.
Strangely, the show Zoobilee Zoo just came up in conversation at home with my wife. She just randomly turned to me and she goes, "Do you remember the show Zoobilee Zoo?" And I said, "Absolutely." Van Gogh the Lion. I have no idea why it came up.
Just popped into her head. It was just kismet that this show would be coming up. It's in
serendipity.
The zeitgeist, I guess. Another interesting aspect of Zoobly Zoo is that the Earworm theme song was written by none other than Haim Saban and Shuki Levy, which were a team responsible for a myriad of cartoon and children's theme songs throughout the 80s and 90s, including He-Man, and also creating a little show that you might have heard of called the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
Yeah, Haim Saban factors prominently in a lot of programming from the 90s mostly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's weird because before the Power Rangers, I would see his name associated with these like off-brand Sunday morning cartoons that were like, Robin Hood or something, or like Aladdin knockoffs and stuff like that.
Exactly.
At any rate, the Saban company seems to have done fairly well for themselves.
It seems so.
My other honorable mention is a show called The Secret City Adventures.
Hi, I'm Commander Mark. You always want to learn how to draw, right? Well, today I'm going to teach you how to draw. I'm going to teach you how to conquer that flat piece of paper and draw in 3D, three-dimensional drawing. Get your pencil, get your paper. I'll be right back.
But I knew that as simply Commander Mark.
I have never heard of this.
It is a drawing show hosted by a man named Commander Mark Kistler, who dressed up in some like a combination of a race car driver suit, but with stuff on it to make it look like a space suit.
Okay.
And he kind of just led an instructional drawing adventure, but it was always relating to using perspective and like cubes and shapes to build cityscapes out of. And because of this show, that was kind of my go-to thing whenever I was just kind of doodling. It was always, how do I make a cube castle? And, he would put these little aliens coming out of holes. And I learned a lot of, I guess, drawing tricks from him.
That sounds really interesting, and I'm upset that I never was exposed to it. To YouTube I go.
Yes, it is now on YouTube after many, many years of thinking I dreamed this. It is there and can be seen.
You are validated.
Now, on with the countdown. It's coming in at number 3 for my list proper. If we go with the 3, 2, 1 format, it's only fitting that I start with a show called 3, 2, 1 Contact.
3, 2, 1.
Contact is the secret, is the moment when everything happens. Contact is the answer, is the reason that everything happens. Contact. Let's make contact.
This ran from 1980 to 1988, and it was all about science. It was kind of originally intended to be the precursor to a show like Bill Nye the Science Guy, which also deserves mention, but my list was 5 already. So, however, PBS, for whatever reason at the time, didn't think that children would be engaged by a middle-aged scientist as a host. So they wanted children themselves to be the hosts. And that's what it became. That was kind of the angle. It was a science show, by kids, for kids.
Yep, it's created by Samuel Y. Gibbon Jr. I know that because I have it on my list.
Oh.
And it was going to be something that I picked that I thought was a little bit more obscure, but you beat me to the punch.
Yeah, it's not something that I watch a ton of, probably only for a year or two out of my childhood. But it was super memorable, and I just loved the format and the style of it. And, that's why it's at number 3, I guess. But my favorite part, and all of my picks happen to have this theme that I noticed after I put them together. Basically, every single one of them is ultimately about solving mysteries. So my favorite part of 3, 2, 1 Contact was the Bloodhound Gang segment.
Whenever there's trouble, we're there on the dime.
That's right, the Bloodhound Gang. Oh my God, so much nostalgia.
It's a group of kid scientist detectives, and they would break up their mysteries over 2 or 3 episodes and use science to solve them. And that was it. Kind of started a trend in PBS, as we'll see, and it's a great way to keep you coming back to see like what happens next.
Absolutely.
That's my number 3.
All right, so we're coming to me now. I did not pipe up with honorable mentions, so maybe I'll throw some out real quick here before I go to my list proper. You kind of mentioned Zoobly Zoo and Bill Nye the Science Guy, so I'll take those out. One thing I'll mention is Shining Time Station.
Oh, good one.
Reach for the speed, reach for the whistle, go where the rail may run. Reach for the words, reach for the story, follow the rainbow sun. To a shining time station, where dreams can come true, waiting there for you.
Yeah, now it came a little later, so I only really watched it for a little bit because by then I was getting to be 7 or 8 years old, you know. What's interesting about Shining Time Station, and the reason I like to bring it up, is because this was the debut of the character Thomas the Tank Engine.
Right.
Thomas the Tank Engine, of course, has taken on he's a whole franchise of his own. But I don't know if a lot of people remember that he was originally just a segment of Shining Time Station. The show was created by Britt Elcroft and Rick Sigelko. And another thing that's important to remember, there was a character named Mr. Conductor that was played by none other than Ringo Starr for the first year. And then George Carlin, well, I guess it's Ringo Starr for the first 2 years, and then George Carlin for the second 2 years, which is
Yes, sir.
very strange and hard to believe, but there it is.
Yeah, and it was actually my personal introduction to both people.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. It comes as such a shock a few years later when I'm realizing what George Carlin is really all about, to have seen him as Mr. Conductor.
Yeah, he was, was the gateway drug into the greater world and the
I guess so.
much more non-fantasy based world of George Carlin.
It's so true. So I just wanted to mention Shining Time Station. You already mentioned 321 Contact, which I also had. So I will see 321 Contact, and I will call Square One.
Oh no, that was next on my list. Look at this.
I figured. So Square One ran from 87 to 92, and it was not that dissimilar from 321 Contact in that it was of course it was an educational show, all math-based, mostly math-based, and it was essentially a sketch show about math. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, Saturday Night Live for kids using math.
Yeah, Saturday Night Live for kids about math.
Yep.
You might have more information there in your notes. But that's what I will start with at number 3. Something we've talked about a lot as a part of Square One are on the MathNet segments when they would reach into their jackets. Instead of pulling out guns, they'd pull out their calculators.
That's right, holsters and all for them.
Iconic.
My big takeaways from Square One, of course, MathNet is the overall thing that I focus on because once again, it fits the theme of it's another PBS show that drew me in because it had a mystery solving aspect and it was a series that gave you the mystery in installments. Whereas 321 Contact did it over 2 or 3 episodes. MathNet kind of lasted for the whole week usually.
Right.
I basically remember it for the game show parodies, the skits, and the music videos as well. And it was actually the first place I ever saw Weird Al. He had a music video called Patterns.
Right. Yes.
Everywhere I see them there, I stop and stare at patterns. I don't care, I must declare I've got a flair for patterns. On my hair, the clothes I wear, my savoir-faire is patterns. All I see is patterns, the patterns that repeat.
One of the ones that I remember mostly outside of MathNet is MathMan, which is essentially a parody of Pac-Man.
Right.
And the little character would run around and he would encounter math equations done incorrectly.
Mathman, your mission is to eat all the rectangles on the board and no other polygons. When you encounter a polygon, you will have until the count of 3 to make your decision. And beware the inflated Mr. Glitch. Oh. He will eat you if you are wrong. Mathman. Bon appetit. 4 right angles. Oh.
The other two, I guess, big sketches that stick with me are the Late Show, Late Night with David Letterman parody. Do you remember what that was called? It's a super clever title.
I do not. Lay it on me.
Late Afternoon with David Numberman. And very on the nose.
This is true.
And they had a Max Headroom parody called Facts Headful.
Oh my God.
And the guy who played him, Larry Cedar, is actually on YouTube and has his own channel with some of this stuff uploaded, and he's still doing stuff to this day. So it's pretty cool to see.
Awesome. That's my number 3, and I've stolen your thunder as you stole mine. So now where are you going?
Well, we're going straight to my number 1.
All right.
And that is a show titled Ghost Rider.
We don't know where he came from.
He just showed up one night.
What is that thing?
He's not an alien.
What is he?
We think he might be a ghost.
Be serious.
You can see that?
He wants to be friends with us. He can't hear and he can't talk. He can read anything.
It was basically it's kind of like a Power Rangers meets the X-Files type of a concept, but it predates both of those other shows.
Right.
By a year. Ghost Rider came out in 92 and X-Files and Power Rangers both showed up in 93. But basically it's a core group of 5 ethnically diverse teenagers. Later they added 2 more. Led by a kid named Jamal Jenkins, and they're brought together by a supernatural being who can only communicate with them through written words, but they have to be like they're available written words. Like there's a poster where they're standing, or there's a book in their hand, or something that exists in their environment. He can only rearrange what already exists. And basically he takes them through different missions and journeys to solve mysteries in and around their Brooklyn neighborhood of Fort Greene. Any love or recollection for Ghost Rider?
Not really for me. I never really watched it. I'm not sure why. I am familiar with it. I feel like I encountered it on accident a few times throughout my childhood, but I never really sat and watched it. I never made a point to do so.
Gotcha. Sticking with the established PBS mystery formula, this show
Again,
also it also broke up the cases that you were presented with over the course of in this one it was about a week. Each week had its own mystery theme to solve. So even though the show ran for 74 episodes over 3 seasons, there were only actually 18 mystery story arcs in total.
Wow.
And it also featured several recognizable guest stars, including the recently deceased Max Wright, who played the dad on Elf.
Okay.
Julia Stiles of 10 Things I Hate About You fame. And playing Jamal's seldom-seen father was none other than Samuel L. Jackson.
Jeez. Unbelievable.
Yep. Yeah, it's crazy that these... I mean, you wouldn't... I guess we're kind of trained culturally to look at PBS as this sort of oddity, this like lower tier form of entertainment, or this like outside of the mainstream form of entertainment. But,
Right.
you know, I mean, casting calls work just like for them, just like they do in any other form of entertainment. And it's cool how you can go back, and a lot of these shows will have familiar faces. Something I forgot to mention during our discussion of MathNet was that when the show was set in L.A., because it was eventually moved to New York, their police chief on the show was played by James Earl Jones.
Oh, man.
So
That's
PBS is a gold mine.
it really is. All right, back to me, I suppose.
Yes, it is.
All right, so we've messed with each other's lists, so I'm kind of skipping around here. So I'll go to this one. Airing from 83 to 06, although there's been different versions of it because the host continues to keep it alive. And that host is LeVar Burton, and it is Reading Rainbow.
Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow. I can go anywhere, friends to know and ways to grow, a reading rainbow.
Yes, I purposely left this off of my list, both because it doesn't fit my mystery theme and because I knew that you would have to have this.
You have to maintain your aesthetic, after all. That's the most important. Reading Rainbow, of course, is classic. Everybody our age probably knows the theme song to this day.
Absolutely.
It was a show that was very in line with what we were talking about earlier. It was about it wasn't about excitement or grandness or bigness or anything like this. Very simple show, reading books, talking to the authors, visiting locations. He connected the things we read and the themes that books are about. Not every book is based on something real, so you can't always go to here's where the book takes place. That doesn't always work, but they did a good job of connecting the real world to the things you read to sort of illustrate the significance of literature and fiction and nonfiction for that matter, and how it connects to the real world. And I just think it was really well done, very understandable for young kids, enjoyable as you started to get older. And like I said, he did not create the show. LeVar Burton did not create the show, but he has continued to keep it alive, and it's really become probably what he's most known for at this point. LeVar Burton has about 3 big things that he's known for.
Right.
And Reading Rainbow is probably the top one amongst them.
Yeah, I think it probably because it has the widest age range of influence.
Yep, and it was on for a long time. Like I said, 83 to 06 is no joke.
Right. And I'm sure that was part of the aim of the show, was to introduce things to children that maybe they weren't familiar with or whatever. And one of those things is that I didn't even know what Swahili was until they talked about it on that show. And they had a book called Jambo Means Hello. And to this day, I will, whenever possible, work that in, that I know that hello in Swahili is Jambo.
I remember there was one episode that blew my mind, and that's when they did a Star Trek themed episode.
Yes.
Because here he is Geordi LaForge, and then they go to the set. I remember them looking at the I don't remember if it's 12 or 16 foot model of the Enterprise. It was the shooting model. They talked about how you had to get ready before you go out and shoot, and for some people it takes longer. He had the visor, Worf had the forehead ridges and all that. And I remember that was a little bit mind-blowing as a little kid, sort of seeing this person that I think I know because I see him on TV, of course, seeing his worlds mix. At that time, you didn't see that sort of thing as much. There was no social media. There was no internet. You didn't get to know these people outside of what they did and what you knew them for. So that was mind-blowing as a little kid to see those two things cross over.
Absolutely. And that episode of Reading Rainbow aired in real time as, Star Trek was still in current show.
Right.
So that made it even more interesting. And I know we were basically the same type of kid when it came to gobbling up any kind of behind the scenes stuff we could get our hands on. And like you said,
hard to get at that time.
Yeah, you just didn't see that everywhere. And all of a sudden, bang, here's this. We're going to go behind the scenes of Star Trek. And I would watch that at the time with my dad. He was really into it. And so it was like, wow, this is like a totally unexpected surprise. One of the things that stuck with me from that episode was how they showed the transporter effect was basically glitter stirred in a glass of water.
Right.
For some reason, that's just stuck in there like it was yesterday.
Such a simple thing.
Yep.
So because I stepped on your choices, your list is done, yes?
Oh, yeah, my list is done.
So I do have a third.
Is this
So I'm going.
is this your big one, or did we already
It's
cover
not
it?
necessarily my big one. Mine were not necessarily ranked because we mentioned different things and we did honorable mentions. My list kind of got a little scrambled.
That's fair.
So, but I want to mention this one anyway. This I have to rewind further back into my younger years and mention Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Now I know Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood at this point is ubiquitous and a little bit on the nose. I'm talking about good PBS programming, but I just think it still deserves attention. Hosted and created by Fred Rogers, he was the main creative force behind the show. It ran from 68 to 01.
Amazing.
And at first, it seems like this very gentle, safe, harmless, soft, quiet show with a guy who just wants to tell you that you're just fine the way you are. But when you really start learning about it as an adult, you realize how much more groundbreaking and how much harder it was pushing on the boundaries of what it could do and what it could show. And that, I think, is its more important legacy at this time. Mr. Rogers is just like, I don't know, he might be the best human being who ever lived. So
certainly in the entertainment industry.
I mean, just in terms of, well, for sure. Just in terms of being good and being exactly what he was. And everybody says what you see on TV was what he was in real life. And so I just really wanted to mention Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood because that was important to me. And I did watch it a lot, even in the days where the two heavy hitters at that time were Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and, of course, Sesame Street, which started the year after 69. It's still running to this day. Sesame Street is absolutely great and deserves recognition. Grover is fantastic. But even as a kid, I watched and preferred Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, if that's not your big one, I mean, those are certainly the two cultural big ones. Those are the biggest PBS
Absolutely.
shows ever.
Yeah.
And I think Mr. Rogers probably is the prototype for what would later become the term low key. Because, like you said, if you really look at that show, it was low key brave and low key risky, and it might not have been the first in the areas of the things that it presented, but it certainly was a very rare thing to see. When he would have an African American person on, I think they were like putting their feet in the same little pool at the same time, and just to demonstrate that like they're people, they're just people, everybody's the same.
Yeah, so that was I don't remember the actor's name, but he was playing the neighborhood police officer, and it was, the story was it was a hot day, and hey, you could come cool your feet in my little pool here, just this little, little kiddie pool.
Right.
And the reason that was significant was that was pretty close in timing to like when there was like an acid attack on African Americans using a public pool. And it was in direct response to that, which is just not hard to believe, but it's interesting to remember that Mr. Rogers was sort of current enough in his time to directly respond to something that was actually happening, and it was ripped from the headlines, so to speak.
Yeah, it's perfect. I mean, he didn't have to do that, but he thought it was important enough to go right after a current issue and kind of nip it in the bud.
In the kindest, gentlest way.
Absolutely. One of the things that I liked most about it was not about the show, but a specific episode that had a real like educational or like comforting purpose, was when he had Margaret Hamilton on, who played the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz, and was specifically demonstrating like, look, here she is, she's not in makeup, this is what she's like, and then everything's just make believe, and that was obviously fit in with his larger theme of make believe on the show.
There was another story where he got a letter from a child viewer, so to speak, who was actually blind and was worried about his fish. So he would always say out loud, "I'm feeding the fish now," on every episode. Little things like that.
Well, a lot of these PBS shows have in common a thing that is like that you just mentioned, an attention to detail like that.
Yeah. Yep. And it's a response to the realities of the world without having to sort of lecture you about it.
Sure.
It's just like you've probably seen the version of things that is bad, but rather than sitting you down and lecture, we're just going to show you something that's can give you a positive outlook. But again, they were willing to take on the hard stuff. There was an episode where there was an assassination. I want to say it was Robert Kennedy.
Right.
And one of the puppets in Puppetland asks one of the adult human characters about the word assassination because it had been in the news a lot. And so, again, it just illustrates that they were very willing to take on what was going on in the real world, but do it in a gentle way that was very palatable for all types of viewers / listeners of basically any age range, etc. They were very willing to handle things like that. And sometimes I think people get a little afraid to take on topics, either because they're afraid they're going to make it worse or not going to say the right thing. But this show did it. At least this show and Fred Rogers himself did it the best he knew how, and I think that's commendable.
Absolutely, and something that everybody in entertainment and news and otherwise could really learn from and really incorporate more of into, programming now.
Absolutely. So I have a few other things to mention. It seems like our format on this show, dear listeners, has fallen apart a little bit because we stepped all over each other's lists. So I'm going to go ahead and encourage that, if it's okay with my friend and your friend Claude. I'm just going to throw out the mentions of the shows on PBS that I sort of have come to appreciate as an adult.
The judges have informed me that we can't allow that, so go ahead.
Nova, the science documentary show.
Great one, yeah.
Still running, started in 1974. The Joy of Painting with Bob Ross.
Definitely.
Ran from 83 to 94. So I was still a kid when it ended, but I still watched it as an adult on Netflix all the time. Bob Ross is right up there with Fred Rogers, just being like totally gentle, just good person who had a good outlook and a simple way of viewing the world. And then Antiques Roadshow, because apparently I am 100 years old, which started in 97 and still runs currently, and I definitely can get sucked into that. So those are kind of the three current shows that I watch as an adult.
Yeah, I always kind of blame the Antiques Roadshow for what became this reality show craze of things like Storage Wars and American Pickers and things. And what's the other one there? The Vegas Pawn Boss or Pawn something.
Well, yeah, there's been a couple of pawn-based shows. Yeah,
I forget what it is. I mean, basically these things that kind of feed you values of antique objects based on backstories, and they get you hooked on this idea that you're gonna see somebody uncover kind of a forgotten treasure, and suddenly they're super rich because of it, and it works every time.
It does happen. And sometimes bring up this thing that I got this necklace and it was worn by Marie Antoinette, and the guy's like, it's worth $15.
Yep.
Sometimes somebody shows up with a binder full of magic cards that are worth $75,000. So you just never know.
Right.
That's all I got, man.
Cool. So that brings our PBS episode to a close. I have been your friend Claude. And remember to follow the advice of Mr. Rogers. For when life gets tough, look for the helpers.
And I've been just Jamie.
And we will see you next time.
Later.
It's such a good feeling to know you're alive. It's such a happy feeling. You're growing inside, and when you wake up ready to say, I think I'll make a snappy new day. It's such a good feeling, a very good feeling. The feeling you know that I'll be back when the day is new. And I'll have more ideas for you. And you'll have things you'll want to talk about. I will too. You always make each day such a special day. You know how? By just your being you. Only one person in the whole world like you. That's you yourself. I'll be back next time. Bye-bye.